Hi, I'm Ira Wallace with Southern Exposure Seed Exchange here at Acorn Community Farm, and I'm for the soil because the soil is the basis of our agriculture. Soil grows our plants, and I love good soil.
Could it be the first day of summer 2022 already? Hey everybody, I'm Jeff Ishii, the host of your program today, and this is For the Soil, a conversation. Real pleasure to welcome you to the podcast today. And we are publishing this podcast on Tuesday, June 21st, and it is the first day of summer, a momentous day for farmers and gardeners everywhere. But there's also another very special day coming up later this week on Thursday, June 23rd. It is National Soil Health Day. That's Tuesday, June 23rd, National Soil Health Day. And this event actually was just started a couple of years ago, back in 2019, I believe it was, and they had well over 1 million people nationwide participate in this event in its inaugural year. So this would be the third anniversary of the starting of National Soil Health Day. Once again, that is on Thursday of this week, June 23rd. Well, our podcast today, we welcome a very special guest, Michael Carter Jr. Michael is a really interesting guy. I had a lot of questions for Michael, as well as my co-host, both Eric Benfelt and Mary Sketch Bryant. Michael Carter Jr. has some innovative ideas and some very interesting viewpoints, and I know that you'll like that. I certainly enjoyed our conversation with Michael Carter Jr., so without further ado, let's go to the show. Welcome, everyone, to For the Soil, a conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii, and joining us today, we have Mary Sketch Bryant with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition, also Eric Benfelt with the Virginia Cooperative Extension Community Viability Program. And guys, we have a very special guest with us today from Orange County, Virginia. Some very intriguing topics, I believe, we're going to be talking about today. Eric, would you do us the honor of introducing our guest?
Well, Mary and I are pleased to have Michael Carter Jr. join us today. I know I've worked with Michael Carter Jr. through Virginia State University's Small Farm Outreach Program, and also learning more about Carter Farms and his work on not only soil health, but issues of equity, justice, and land access. And we're currently working with him on a training titled Beyond Racism. So Michael brings a breadth of knowledge and understanding to this conversation. So we're very pleased to have Michael with us.
Michael, tell us about your farming operation and the Carter brothers.
Oh, very good. Well, I'm a century farmer of sorts. My great-great-grandparents purchased our property in 5th, 1910. Jefferson Davis Shirley and Catherine Walker Shirley, my great-great-grandparents, in Orange County, Virginia, for $722.05. And we've kind of maintained and held the property since then. I just recently started working with the family after a sojourn in Ghana, West Africa for about 5 years. And I returned back to, quote unquote, take over the family farm. My uncle is not quite with the takeover, but or the transitional process. But we've been working with the farm now for about 4 years. We mainly focus on growing ethnic vegetables, and ethnic vegetables, ideally vegetables coming out of East and West Africa and Southern Africa as well. And over this past season, I've been trying to develop this theory or thought process of growing and eating for your ethnic type. So I want to grow vegetables, various origin types, ideally from the African nationality or continental region, and see how it affects people of African descent in the short term and long term in terms of health, growth, nutrition, etc. And Carter Brothers is my son's my son's business. We sell seeds and other things, but mostly seeds for the most part on the website. And it was a way to bring in them and kind of incorporate them into agriculture. I was born into agriculture. My father's an agriculture teacher. my uncle's agriculture teacher, my neighbor's agriculture teachers, my godfather's agriculture teacher. So I was kind of enveloped in agriculture from a young age. But like most of us who were enveloped in something at a young age, we try to run away from it as soon as we get the opportunity. And I was no different. So ideally, I developed with my sons, Carter brothers, to kind of keep them in agriculture. They would be the sixth generation of the family to work on Carter farms. So hopefully in sharing a lot of the history that I share about the family and the farm, to keep them a lot more engaged, and I don't feel the need necessarily to leave the farm like I did when I was, a youngster, or younger than them, or younger than me, older than them.
Michael, I know that, as a multi-generational and century farm, that family and history is really important to you and how that intersects with care for the land. And so it'd be interesting to hear what soil health and what care for the land looks like on your farm and on your land.
Well, yeah, I think it's very much in the same state as the American state of how we deal with race in America. My uncle, who's currently tending the land, or was tending the land before I returned back, is very much old school 1970s, 1980s farmer. We're leaving in plowing and disking and harrowing, roll plowing, and kind of the general conventional agricultural practices that to me make my skin crawl. So a lot of the land is actually, I think, more so in recovery. There's a good chunk of the land that is in pasture that hasn't been tilled much, if at all. And I'm trying to keep it that way as much as possible. I believe that my great grandmother's long life was, probably a result of the land not being tilled. And I'm a very strong believer that, no till or very limited till, and then maintaining the soil microorganisms as much as possible is key to nutrition long term. There's a lot of challenges within agriculture that we don't control, but that's one of the ones that we can. And we try to, so on my side of the farm, we do no till or low till. We utilize a lot of row covers, landscape fabrics, silage tarps to, do weed suppression, or to, create the a more tillable ground without tillage. We are dealing with a heavy clay in Orange County, or at least outside of Orange County. So it's, not a lot of anything. It's not a loam in any stretch of imagination. It's strictly clay. But just in my, year or so practicing, some of the things that I've been practicing in terms of no-till, utilizing the silage tarps, I've seen definitely an improvement in the soil and an improvement in crops. And then we focus on crops that, really help to aid in the development and growth of the soil. I think bringing in various African, or lack of a better term, foreign vegetables helps increase or create a lot of diversity in the soil microbiota. So bringing in, amaranth, or, my Nigerian spinach, manago, I would only believe really attracts a lot of different microorganisms that normally wouldn't be there. That helps with the just the development, the growth, and the health of the soil.
And then, Michael, I know you're a student of history. How do you see soil health being centered in history, equity, justice, and land access now and into the future?
I definitely see a very equitable relationship between soil health and racism in America. Because of a lack of understanding by those who came to colonize this nation, they didn't understand the various cultures that were here. So you saw, the indigenous cultures and the African cultures kind of lumped in together. And, when I say lumped in together, all the indigenous cultures were now lumped into this term called Indian. These 70, 100, 200 different nations that were now lumped into one nomenclature of Indian. And the same thing for African cultures, where, instead of being an Ewe or a Fanti or, Maasai or whomever else, you would have now all these nations, all these cultures lumped into the term Negro, colored, or Black. And not really giving any understanding of the diversity of those cultures, the differences in those cultures, and we saw the same thing happen in the soil, what we just call the soil dirt. Not understanding the bacteria, the protozoa, the archaea, the fungi, the springtails, the microarthropods, all the things that made the soil was now lumped into this thing called either the soil or dirt, and then there was a war made on these things, very much like the African American and indigenous. There were wars made upon it. They created almost a hardpan, within both the cultures of those communities, and the destruction of various microbiota or cultural understandings. The same thing was done to the soil in the 1940s after World War II, and the Green Revolution was really a war on the soil, because the powers that be didn't understand the diversity and the richness of the cultures, and just leaving it alone would benefit everybody. But instead, it became more of a thing of if we can't profit from it, we have to make war with it until we can make profit from it. And in looking at both how the soil and the indigenous and African American communities have kind of had to deal with this understanding is very similar, because we see, something like a blight, a late blight, something like, I guess soil nutrition, hardpans, erosion control, all these other aspects that have come because of the modern practices that were brought in, or the more destructive practices that were brought in to a culture that didn't have these issues prior to the introduction of these thought processes. And the same thing happened within the African American community or the African community. You have all these scourges come in because of these practices and thought processes placed upon the soil of these people, or the soul of these people, and the soul of this land. And the best way to fix it is really to leave it alone. I'm of the strong belief that you cannot fix a problem with the same mind that went to destroy it or created it. And, for those of us who've come out of conventional agriculture, that it can't be done. We can't fix the problem of soil health without taking a step back and letting other people deal with it who don't have the same conventional background. And the same thing with racism in America. You can't fix it if you've been a product of it, if you benefited from it, and if you can't really understand it fully because you think, your processes are really rooted in a more archaic and foundational American thought process in relation to these cultures. So, I think the destruction of the soil and the erosion of the soil and soil cultures and soil microorganisms are very much equatable to that of the African in America and the indigenous people in America. And the only way to really restore it is to leave it alone and let them figure out how to restore themselves.
Very well said. We're talking today with Michael Carter Jr. of the Carter Farms. And Michael, I want to compliment you on your website. And our listeners, I think, would be intrigued by this website. It's thecarterfarms.com. That's in Orange County, Virginia. Once again, that's thecarterfarms.com. And Michael, I learned a whole new word at your website. There's an entire page. You took the word agriculture, very creative, very clever, and it's a very serious topic. You took the word agriculture and you substituted the letter G with the letter F, and it became Africulture. And you've devoted an entire page of your website to this topic. Explain to us, what is Africulture?
Thank you, Jeff. Africulture is my nonprofit, so it's an actual business. And Africulture is devoted to training, teaching, educating, and enhancing people's understanding of the principles, practices, plants, and people of African descent that's contributed to agriculture. For many of us, especially for African Americans, when we think about agriculture and African Americans, the first thing that comes to our mind is slavery. And that's really a misnomer in terms of the contributions that Africans have made to agriculture and to American agriculture. So, we do a lot of education. So we've done a lot of education around the various crops that Africans have had a tremendous impact upon, that have shaped and influenced American culture. So we talk about crops like the cocoa tree or chocolate, which is about 60%, 75% grown in Ghana and Ivory Coast, two West African nations, that was started ideally by a gentleman named Tete Kwashi, who took some trees from Equatorial Guinea and kind of commercialized and became the first commercial production of cocoa. And they've been the leading producers of cocoa for the last 125, 130, 140 years. Not taking anything away from the indigenous people of South America where the cocoa came from and was cultivated, but they didn't commercialize it. Now chocolate is in every home, every gas station, every school, every store in America. Another one we talk about that has tremendous impact is the cocoa plant or the cocoa tree. The cola leaf and the cola tree coming out of West Africa as well, in which you get the term Coca-Cola. Most of us know about the coca part of the Coca-Cola and how that's derived from the plant that produces cocaine, but very few of us knew the cola leaf and how this plant or this tree out of West Africa was used to provide the caffeine that was needed to give you that jolt of energy. So Pepsi Cola, RC Cola, Coca-Cola all had this particular cola as part of the initial recipes. What happened was they changed the spelling of it because in West Africa, they spell cola Kola, but in America, for marketing purposes, it became Cola, the C and the C, the cocoa and the cola. We talk about vanilla, we talk about cotton, we talk about indigo, there are so many different contributions, in terms of raised beds, in terms of irrigation, in terms of even, soil health. There are certain practices that happened in West Africa that preserve the soil, where you couldn't go into certain forests to preserve the forest. They would call it sacred forest. They would call, and if you went in there, it was folklore that said if you went in there to certain forests, you would die. And that kept people away for a very long time to help preserve and keep those forests and forest lands. So we really try to make agriculture more palatable to everyone.
Thank you, Michael. And your hope and aspirations for your children and grandchildren, thinking about a century farm and introducing them to agriculture as well as soil health?
Probably my hope and aspirations is, one, they don't have to do the racial literacy work that I'm doing now, that I can kind of suck that all up and do all of that. And then by the time they're ready to jump into and take over, or at least, take over where I've started, they can focus on being just farmers and not necessarily Black farmers or, farmers who have to kind of defend and work toward bringing a certain level of equity, justice, understanding to the African-American farmers or the social disadvantaged farmers. I would love for them to take over the family farm and expand it and grow it, both in terms of products, services, as well as land and land acquisition. And then, I'm not sure if all of them will be a part of it, but I'm sure one of them will be. And I'm looking forward to their children and their grandchildren being able to, further it along. I'm looking forward to seeing the 7th generation on our farm and kind of saying, well done. We've preserved it for 7 generations and let's do it for 14 more.
Well, unfortunately, our time is up for this episode of For the Soil, a Conversation, but we're going to have Michael Carter Jr. back for a part 2, an extended conversation, if you will. He has some very intriguing ideas and cares a lot about soil health, as we all do. So join us in a couple of weeks for part 2 with Michael Carter Jr. For the Soil, a Conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, just visit the website forthesoil.org. And if you have a specific question about soil health, just call your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a Soil and Water Conservation District office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of Pottington Bear and the Flip Charts, all rights reserved. For the Soil, a Conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii.